Okay, this is the immune system part 2, and we'll be talking about specific defenses. In part 1, we talked about the inspecific defenses. So when we're talking about specific defenses, this is usually what occurs when the pathogen gets past the non-specific defense. So like it gets past your skin, the inflammatory response may not take care of it. Another name for specific defenses is the immune response. And the immune response gets triggered whenever there's an antigen. Okay, now if you should remember, the antigens are markers that are on a cell, and what they can do is they can trigger that immune response. So with specific defenses, we have what are called B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. So both of these are made in the bone marrow, but they have different functions, or they work a little differently in two different types of immunity. So the B cells are going to be with the antibodies. All right, let me write antibodies. Are going to be with your antibodies. Okay. And then the T lymphocytes are with cell-mediated immunity. Okay, so it's when viruses or bacteria get inside of your actual cells, and the antibodies or the B lymphocytes deal with what gets into your body. So B cells defend the body against pathogens that are in the body fluids. Okay, and this is called humoral immunity. Humoral immunity, make sure you know that. And then the T cells, like I said earlier, are with cell-mediated immunity, and this is when you have things that get into your cells that don't belong there. So with this humoral immunity, we have antibodies, and this big purple thing here is the actual antibody. So all three parts, even though I know the line says antibodies right there, all three parts make up the antibody, the whole Y structure. And there are two ends are antigen binding sites, and these sites right here are what connect to the antigens on the pathogen. So if you look at the little picture on the left, down, towards the left here, bottom, you'll see the little antigens are these little things that are sticking up right there. That's an antigen, okay, from the cell, and the antigen binding sites bind to those. And what happens is each antigen can hook to two cells. So when you have a whole bunch of them, so say another antibody came, and say it hooked right here, like that, then these wouldn't be able to move. And what ends up happening is you have a whole bunch of antibodies that hook to a whole lot of antigens, and they make the pathogens cells clump together, and they're not able to harm you. Now remember, we're talking about humoral immunity, so that's, cells that are in your fluid. Now there are different shapes, obviously, of the antigen binding sites, but some of them are pretty similar, and so because the antigen binding sites are similar, they're able to attach to antigens that have similar shapes. Okay, so one antigen is able to recognize a variety. One antibody is able to recognize a variety of antigens. So what happens in humoral immunity? Well, you have plasma cells that will release these antibodies. Those antibodies go into the bloodstream, and I told you that they will attack the pathogen. Okay, and by attack them, that means they attach to them and they make them clump together. And then as all of them get clumped together, the antibodies can overcome this infection. Now these plasma cells, which release the antibodies, eventually will die out, and they stop producing antibodies. Now even though they've stopped producing antibodies, you still have these B cells, and these B cells can produce what are called memory B cells. Okay, so your B cells can make one of two things. They can make either plasma cells, which make antibodies, or they can make memory B cells. And these memory B cells are floating around still in your blood and, in your different body fluids, and they are capable of producing antibodies still. So what they do is these B cells, if say the same pathogen comes, the B cells make the plasma cells, and then the plasma cells make the antibodies. And it just happens a lot faster the second time you are exposed to the same pathogen. Okay, and this is what I just talked about. Now what I'd like you to do is go ahead and look at this diagram here. And in this diagram, let's look at some of the stuff that's in it. Let me point some stuff out. So you have what's called pluripotent hematopoietic cell. Now you should remember the term pluripotent, totipotent, omnipotent. And that was when we were talking about stem cells. So in the bone marrow are these blood stem cells that are going to become blood cells. But right now they're pluripotent, meaning that they can become many different types of cells. But because it says hematopoietic right here, they're going to be blood cells. Hemato is blood. And so this bone marrow, which remember I told you the T cells and the B cells are made in the bone marrow, they can become either B cells, okay, and then those B cells can become what? That's right, plasma cells. Okay, or they can become T cells, or they can be natural killer cells. And the natural killer cells are the same as the cytotoxic cells, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Now this diagram, it's okay, but the one that I told you to download, it's a Word document, and it says humoral and cell-mediated immunity chart. And hopefully you downloaded that already, because this is what I'm getting ready to talk about. So on this one, with the humoral immunity, the antigen binds to the antibodies, okay? You have what are called helper T cells, and these kind of come in and they help to activate those B cells. The activated B cells will grow and divide, and they'll either become plasma cells or memory B cells. And what was special about the plasma cells? That's right, they're the ones that release the antibodies. And then what do the memory B cells do? Right, they maintain the knowledge, I guess you could say, not necessarily knowledge like our brain, but they're able to make plasma cells that will release those same antibodies if they come in contact with the pathogen. Now with the cell-mediated immunity, it's a little bit different. We have what are called macrophages. Okay, now if you do remember the macrophages, right here, macrophage, okay, those were basophils when we talked about them when we talked about the blood. And remember phagocyte, remember cellular eating? So they can consume a virus, and when they do, now they display the antigen on its surface. So what happens is the helper T cells, remember the helper T cells activated the B cells earlier? Well, they will activate the T cells to divide. These helper T cells actually divide, and see, helper T cells activate B cells, right? They can also activate cytotoxic T cells, those were the natural killer cells. And they have what are called memory T cells. Now you notice I didn't say anything about antibodies. There's no antibodies involved when we talk about cell-mediated immunity. Oh, sorry about that. When we talk about cell-mediated immunity. So the cytotoxic T cells bind to the body cells and destroy them. Because remember, cell-mediated immunity, it attacks cells that have been infected by the virus. Whereas with humoral, H-U-M-O-R, means fluid or liquid, and the humoral cells, those are the ones with antibodies, and they attack pathogens that are in your blood. Okay? Now, there's two types of immunity. Acquired immunity and, two types of acquired immunity. Active immunity and passive immunity. And with active immunity, there's two ways you can get it. You can either be exposed to the pathogen, and then your body makes antibodies, okay, and so that when something happens, or if you're exposed to that pathogen, you don't get sick. Or you can actually get the vaccination for it, And usually it's a milder form of the pathogen, and it causes your body to make antibodies. Sometimes if you get a flu shot or something like that, you might get a little bit sick from the shot. Some people say they get the flu from the shot, but that allows your body to make antibodies from it. So active immunity can develop after exposure to the antigen or deliberate exposure to the antigen, and that would be a vaccine. So one way would be actually getting the infection and fighting it, and the other way would be getting a vaccine. Okay, so with types of immunity, you have acquired, okay, that's either getting the disease or getting a vaccination, and then you have what are called a natural immunity. Okay, natural immunity is a type of passive immunity, and you can have antibodies that are produced by the mother when she, a mother breastfeeds. She can pass on the antibodies to her children. And this usually lasts maybe 6 months to a year in a baby, and hopefully by then the child has developed their own antibodies. Another type of passive immunity is when you get antibodies produced by other animals. Okay, so one would be by the mother. Another way would be, for instance, with rabies shots. Rabies shots are made from the antibodies that animals who have had rabies make. And they make a vaccine out of it, and then people are able to fight off the rabies shot. It used to be you had to get rabies shots in your stomach. Someone had told me that you have to get them in your neck now, but it's not anything fun. Okay, let's look at the review questions. So an example of the body's, a fever is an example of the body's non-specific defenses. Most important non-specific defense is your skin. During pregnancy, mother passes antibodies. That's called passive immunity. It's also called natural immunity, which is a type of passive. Injection of a weakened or mild form of a pathogen to produce immunity is known as vaccination. All right, and that's the end of this section.